It was just supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway. No phones, no noise, just peace. At least, that's what Mia and her two best friends, Arjun and Sarah, had in mind when they found the old cabin deep in the woods. It looked perfect from the outside. A little worn down, sure, but charming enough. They didn't notice the strange carvings on the door, or the way the trees seemed too still, as if holding their breath. That first night, everything was normal. They laughed, played cards by the fireplace, and told silly ghost stories just to scare each other. But when the clock struck midnight, something changed. The fire dimmed on its own. A cold breeze whispered through the cracks, even though the windows were shut tight. Mia thought she heard her name being called, so faint it could have been her imagination, or so she hoped. Arjun brushed it off with a joke, and Sarah laughed nervously, but none of them could quite shake the feeling that they were no longer alone. The woods outside, once silent, now seemed to hum with a low pulsing sound, like a heartbeat buried under the soil. As the night grew deeper, strange things began to happen. Shadows moved just outside their vision. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, but no one was there. And then came the whispers, soft, chilling, calling each of them by name. The voices didn't sound angry. They sounded patient, like they had been waiting a very long time. Mia stood frozen near the door, her heart pounding against her ribs. She turned to Arjun and Sarah, but the words caught in her throat. Because standing just behind them, in the dim light, was a figure she didn't recognize. Mia blinked hard, thinking maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. But when she looked again, the figure was still there. It was tall, almost blending with the darkness, and its face was hidden under a shadow. Before she could even scream, the lights flickered once and the figure was gone. Arjun noticed her pale face and asked if she was okay, but Mia just nodded quickly, afraid that if she spoke, she might say something that would make it all too real. Trying to shake off the fear, they decided to check the cabin, just to be sure no one else was inside. Room by room, they moved together, their footsteps creaking on the old wooden floor. Every now and then, they would hear a faint tapping sound, like fingers brushing against the windows. But when they looked outside, there was nothing there except the dark outline of trees swaying slightly in the cold night air. The cabin was old, much older than the online photos had shown. Dust clung to every surface, and the fireplace stones were cracked with age. Sarah found an old journal tucked behind one of the loose bricks near the hearth. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, and inside, the pages were filled with strange symbols and hurried handwriting. Most of it didn't make sense, but a few words stood out. Warnings about voices in the night and something called the Watcher in the Woods. Arjun laughed nervously, trying to brush it off as some weird old legend, but Mia wasn't so sure. Something about the way the cabin felt, the way the shadows moved, it all seemed too real. They decided to stay close together, sleeping in the living room with the fire burning low. No one admitted it, but none of them wanted to be alone. Hours passed. The fire crackled and the night deepened. Just as Mia was drifting into a restless sleep, she heard it again, the whisper. This time, it was clearer, closer, almost at her ear. Her eyes snapped open and she sat up, her heart pounding. She wasn't the only one awake. Across the room, Sarah was staring at something with wide, terrified eyes. Mia followed her gaze and froze. In the faint glow of the dying fire, a set of handprints appeared slowly across the window, pressing from the outside. But the terrifying part was, they were too high up for any normal person to reach. Sarah whispered Mia's name, her voice shaking. Arjun jumped to his feet, grabbing the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. They all stared at the window, watching as the handprints slowly faded away, like mist being wiped off glass. None of them dared to move. The air inside the cabin had turned icy, and the fire no longer gave any warmth. Mia's mind raced. Was it just a trick of the cold? Some weird effect of the glass? But deep down, she knew it wasn't something natural. It was something that wanted them to know it was there. Arjun suggested they leave the cabin, but when Mia checked the front door, it wouldn't budge. It wasn't locked. It felt like something heavy was holding it shut from the outside. Panic started to creep in. Sarah began flipping through the old journal, desperate to find anything that could explain what was happening. Among the strange notes, she found a passage that mentioned an ancient spirit tied to the land, something that didn't like strangers disturbing its ground after dark. Locals had once left offerings by the woods to keep it calm, but no one had done that in years. Meanwhile, Arjun noticed something strange about the walls. Up close, he could see faint markings, almost like runes, carved deep into the wood, hidden under layers of old paint. They weren't random, they were everywhere. Above door frames, around windows, even under the floorboards. The entire cabin was a cage, not to keep something out, but to keep something in. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the trees, carrying with it more whispers, now louder, overlapping, dozens of voices. Mia pressed her hands over her ears, but the whispers still slithered into her mind. They weren't just calling her name anymore. They were warning her. As the night dragged on, each of them began to experience different things. Sarah swore she saw a figure watching them through the cracks in the wall. Arjun felt something breathing against the back of his neck when he stood too close to the door. And Mia started to see flashes of a memory that wasn't hers. A little girl running through the woods, barefoot, crying for help. But the cabin seemed alive, feeding off their fear, twisting reality. The three friends huddled together, trapped in a place that wasn't just haunted, it was hungry. And the whispers in the dark were growing louder. The hours dragged by like years. Every second inside that cabin felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. Mia, Arjun, and Sarah clung to each other, whispering plans that none of them really believed would work. Outside, the forest had changed. It wasn't just the trees anymore. The shadows seemed thicker, moving with purpose, circling the cabin like wolves around wounded prey. The whispers grew sharper, sometimes breaking into screams that only Mia could hear, twisting her mind until she could barely tell what was real. Sarah kept flipping through the old journal, her fingers trembling. Somewhere near the back, she found something that chilled her blood. A map, a rough sketch showing a clearing deep in the woods. Next to it, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were the words, "The offering ground. Bring it back before the third hour." None of them had any idea what it was, but one thing was clear. If they stayed inside much longer, they weren't going to survive till morning. The clock on the wall, a dusty old thing that hadn't moved all day, suddenly ticked once, just once, loud enough that it made all three of them jump. Mia grabbed the map, and without thinking, they decided to make a run for it. They packed nothing. There wasn't time. Every second they stayed inside, the whispers got stronger, almost pulling at their bodies, their thoughts. It felt like the cabin itself didn't want to let them go. The door finally swung open, but not because of them. It was as if something had unlocked it from the outside. Cold air rushed in, bringing with it a smell of damp earth and something else, something rotten. They didn't look back. They ran into the woods, clutching the journal and the map like it was their only lifeline. The forest was worse. Every tree looked the same. The moon barely lit the path, and the deeper they went, the less sound they heard. No crickets, no wind, just the sound of their own breathing and the crack of twigs under their feet. Mia kept glancing over her shoulder, sure she saw shadows darting just out of sight. At one point Arjun tripped and fell, scraping his hands bloody on the sharp stones, but he didn't even cry out. They couldn't stop. They couldn't slow down. Finally they stumbled into the clearing shown on the map. In the center stood an old stone altar, broken and covered in moss. Around it, the ground was blackened, like fire had scorched it long ago. The air here was heavier, thicker, and the whispers were deafening. Mia clutched her head, trying to block them out, but the words kept forcing their way in. Return it. Return it. Sarah noticed something half buried near the altar, a small wooden box, cracked and ancient. Without thinking, she dug it out with her bare hands. As soon as she touched it, the trees around them seemed to groan, bending inward like the forest was breathing. The ground began to tremble under their feet. A deep rumble, low and growing. Mia, Arjun, and Sarah backed away slowly, eyes wide with terror. Something was waking up, something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. And now, it knew exactly where they were. The ground trembled harder now, sending small rocks tumbling into the darkness. The air grew colder, so cold that Mia could see her breath, even though it was the middle of the night. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what was happening. The box in Sarah's hands felt alive, pulsating with a strange, unnatural energy. Every time she moved, the whispers grew louder, until it felt like they were screaming inside her head. "Put it down," Arjun muttered, his voice hoarse, but no one moved. None of them could take their eyes off the box, as if something was pulling them in, forcing them to look, forcing them to listen. The rumbling continued, louder now, shaking the earth beneath their feet. It felt like the very fabric of reality was beginning to tear apart. Then, in a flash of cold white light, the shadows around them twisted and writhed like living things. Mia screamed, but the sound was drowned out by the deafening shriek that came from the woods. Something was coming, something big, something ancient, and it was angry. Without warning, the box cracked open. The top split down the middle with a sickening sound, like bone breaking. Inside, nestled in the darkness, was a small, gleaming stone, blacker than night. As soon as it was exposed to the air, the temperature dropped even further, and the whispers turned into a deafening cacophony of voices, all demanding one thing. "Give it back." Mia stepped forward, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She didn't know why, but something in her told her that this stone was the key. The stone in the box wasn't just any relic. It was alive, and it was calling to her. Arjun tried to grab it from Sarah, his face twisted with fear. "What are you doing? We need to leave. Now!" But Sarah wasn't listening. She was staring at the stone, transfixed, as if it had already taken hold of her. Her fingers twitched toward it, and before Mia could stop her, Sarah grabbed it. The moment her fingers touched the stone, a shockwave of energy pulsed through the clearing. Mia's vision blurred, and the ground beneath them split open, sending cracks running through the earth like veins of a living creature. The trees around them bent in unnatural angles, their roots twisting and writhing as if they had a mind of their own. And then, for a moment, everything went still. A presence filled the clearing. It wasn't a sound, but it was there. Mia felt it deep in her bones, a terrible weight pressing down on her, like something watching, something ancient and powerful. And then, from the very earth, a figure emerged. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. A being made of shadow and smoke, with eyes that burned like fiery pits. Its shape shifted, constantly changing, as if it could never settle into a single form. It wasn't human, but it had once been. The whispers had become screams, and now they seemed to come from the figure itself. Mia could barely breathe. She understood. This was the Watcher, the one they had disturbed, the one that had waited for centuries, trapped in the very land they had trespassed on. It spoke, its voice like 1,000 voices intertwined, each one more hollow and distant than the last. "You should have left when you had the chance." As the ground continued to shake, the Watcher reached out, its tendrils of shadow twisting toward them. The figure's gaze fixed on Sarah, who was still holding the stone, her hand frozen in place, her face drained of color. "We are bound," the Watcher continued, its form shifting even further into something unrecognizable. The stone is the key, and now you belong to the darkness. Mia's stomach dropped. She couldn't move, couldn't think, as the weight of the creature's presence grew heavier. Arjun backed away, his voice shaky as he whispered, "What do we do? What do we do now?" The watcher's laughter was low and haunting, filling every corner of the clearing. There is no escape. And in that moment, Mia realized that they hadn't just stumbled upon a haunted cabin. They had awoken something that could never be undone. The watcher's form loomed over them, its tendrils of shadow stretching towards Sarah, who was still paralyzed, clutching the stone. Mia's heart hammered in her chest, but her mind raced with a single thought: the stone. If the watcher was tied to it, then maybe they could destroy it, end this nightmare once and for all. Arjun grabbed Mia's arm. "We need to do something. Now." But Sarah, her face drained of all color, barely seemed to hear them. She was lost in the grip of the watcher's gaze, the stone's dark energy pulsing in her hand. The voices grew louder, a chorus of ancient fury. But in that chaos, Mia saw a flicker of clarity in Sarah's eyes. It was as if she'd snapped back into herself for just a moment. "Give it back!" The watcher's voice was a low growl, its presence suffocating. But Sarah didn't move. Without thinking, Mia lunged forward. She grabbed the stone from Sarah's hand, pulling it away with all her strength. The instant she touched it, a burst of cold energy shot through her body, and she collapsed to the ground. The whispers screamed in her ears, a cacophony of rage and sorrow, but she gritted her teeth, pushing through the pain. The ground beneath them shook violently as the watcher let out a deafening roar. The trees around them began to bend and break, splintering like fragile glass. Arjun pulled Sarah to her feet, dragging her back as Mia struggled to stand. The stone in her hand pulsed, its power too much to contain. Then, with no plan, no idea of what would happen, Mia threw the stone as hard as she could into the center of the altar. A blinding flash of light erupted from the stone, and the earth itself seemed to shudder. The watcher screamed, its form unraveling, dissolving into a black mist that swirled and twisted in every direction. The whispers became shrill, desperate, and then silence. The clearing was still. The oppressive weight of the watcher was gone. For the first time in what felt like hours, Mia could breathe again. But just as they started to relax, something changed. In the distance, a figure emerged from the shadows. Not the watcher, but a man. He was tall, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He walked slowly toward them, his steps almost too quiet to hear. Mia froze. Arjun's grip on Sarah tightened. The man's eyes glowed faintly red as he stopped just outside the clearing. A smile curled at the corners of his lips. "Well done," he said softly. "You freed it. But now it's time to pay the price." The ground trembled again. The earth cracked open once more, but this time a new, darker presence began to rise from it. The stone had been destroyed, but the curse it held wasn't gone, and they realized too late that they weren't the first to disturb the land, and they wouldn't be the last. Mia's heart pounded as she stared at the figure in front of them, his cold smile sending a chill through her body. The air seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, and she could feel the ground beneath her shifting once more. The shadowy figure stood motionless, his glowing eyes locked onto them as though he could see through them, into their very souls. "Who are you?" Arjun's voice cracked as he stepped in front of Sarah, trying to shield her from whatever darkness this man carried. The figure chuckled, a sound that was more like dry leaves scraping against stone. "I am the keeper. I've been waiting for someone to come along and set things in motion. You see, the Watcher was never meant to be freed. But now, thanks to you, the curse has been unleashed once again." Mia felt her stomach twist. "So we've been playing into your hands this whole time?" The keeper's smile widened. "Not exactly. The Watcher needed to be awakened, yes. But you, your fear, your desperation, it's all part of the cycle. You were meant to disturb it. That's why you came here. The land calls to those who are weak, who are drawn to the darkness. The earth beneath them groaned again, and the ground began to split open further, revealing a vast chasm of writhing shadows. The very air seemed to tremble as the dark force that had once been the Watcher began to reform. Mia realized, with a sinking heart, that they had only delayed the inevitable. The curse wasn't just tied to the land, it was tied to them now. "No," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. We can't let it happen again." But the keeper didn't seem concerned. His eyes remained cold, as if nothing mattered except the unfolding of what he had waited for. Mia didn't know how much time they had left. She didn't know if there was any way to fix what had been done. But one thing was clear, the fight was far from over, and they weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to stop the cycle from repeating itself. With a final glance at the keeper, Mia turned, grabbing Arjun and Sarah's hands, pulling them away from the ever-expanding darkness. They didn't know where they were running, but they knew they couldn't stay. The cursed land had claimed so many before them, and they would not become another story to tell. As they ran, the whispers from the woods faded, but Mia's heart remained heavy with one undeniable truth. The darkness had been unleashed, but so had something else. A chance to end it. The journey wasn't over, and as they vanished into the night, the land seemed to sigh in anticipation, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. But for now, they had escaped, at least for tonight.